Okay, so welcome to Northern Disclosure. This is the first podcast in what we hope will be many about the experience of making Northern Exposure from 1990 to 95. It's going to be hosted by my beautiful colleague here, Janine Turner, and myself. We've been talking about doing this for quite a while, so we're both really excited to be doing it, mainly because both of us get besieged daily by people saying they want to know more about the show. They want to go back and revisit it. They want to reboot. They want to hear what it was like. And so Janine and I have, gotten together, and we're gonna do this, and we're gonna bring you great guests. We have a whole bunch of people who were attached to the show originally, and they're going to be coming in on the weekly, and we're going to talk about the show. And then we think we might even try to do a kind of a fan segment once we get rolling here with subsequent episodes, where we'll bring on a fan and they can talk to us about it. So anyway, Janine, you look beautiful. How you doing?
Oh, thanks, Rob. This is what we say in Texas. I got dolled up.
You doll up well.
I think you said that to me on Northern Exposure. It's like, wow, Connell, you clean up well. Remember that line?
I did. And then I said, "What? You look very clean."
Yeah, right. It's like clean. Thanks, Fleischman. Yeah. But I'm thrilled to be doing this with you, Rob. We've been working on this for about a year. This is exciting. We're finally doing it. And so Rob and I both watched the pilot episodes last night, and we were texting each other back and forth. Rob actually said, "Can you talk?" Because we were so excited about watching it again. And then he had watched it before and then I started watching it, and I was texting him like, "Oh my God, you're so funny. Oh my God, look at Barry like rappelling down off the side of his cabin." I mean, it really was. And I texted everybody on the Evergreen, Rhapsody team here. I'm like, you all must watch the show. I promise you'll end up with a smile on your face.
Let me ask you something. That I think I remember, because I was there. I think that was a stunt man rappelling down the side of the building.
You don't have to tell people
I think
that.
It wasn't Barry. No, you do. That's
Barry.
Why we're here. That's why we're here. They want to know.
We want to believe
it
was Barry.
The scoop.
Well, hey, when I was in Cliffhanger, I did a lot of my own rappelling, just saying. But okay. So he had a stuntman, very good. But the fact that, Rob, you were so good. You were so good out of the gate. Right out of the gate. I mean, you and I were talking last night about the writing, but my gosh, Rob, you played it to perfection. And I think you and I came to this Northern Exposure at exactly the same age. We were both on the same plane when we arrived. We were both New York actors, theater actors, and we both really, really cared about our work. I want to ask you, because I came to the show as a method actress. So I was really trying to build like layers and layers of onions of emotion. I don't know what your training was, but we really cared about our work.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Method is a fungible term. I think it gets kind of misused. So, I do as much as I can to be as believable in the work as possible. But the thing that was interesting, I remember, when I read the script for Northern Exposure, I had been doing a lot of theater for about a decade, and I had been on a lot of short lists for TV shows. I had done one other show where I was a secondary or third character, and it didn't last. But so I was starting to get considered for a lot of shows and reading a lot. And when I read the script for Northern Exposure, it read like no other TV script I'd ever read, nor did it seem like it would be a TV show I'd ever seen before. And so I got very excited. And then when I started to key into Joel, per what you said, it felt like a real fit. Like I just got him, I felt like I understood him, and I kind of started from there. When you read it, what do you remember what you're feeling?
Well, I think that, I was just so desperate for work. It was like I had $8 left. I had $8 left to my name. But God is great, because I had been holding out I had been saying no to bikini roles, which is all women were really offered in television at that time. And I said, no. And so I had $8 left. But here was this amazing character that was a Grosse Pointe, Michigan socialite, and that's what I love about the characters. They all have this incredible juxtaposition that you saw in even Barry Corbin. Maurice. He starts out as this tough astronaut and ends at the end. At the end, he's crying over his girlfriend. There was such complexity to our characters.
Let me ask you this: what you say you had $8 in your name? What gave you the fortitude to turn down work? Like, where did that come from? That you could turn down work hoping for something great? Like.
I think it was a question when I moved to New York City from Los Angeles. All my agents said, "What are you doing moving to New York City from Los Angeles?" I said, "Because I'm tired of TNA roles. I just really don't want to do them anymore." And that's all I'm getting. I was like the damsel in distress for A-Team or Knight Rider or whatever it may be. And I was engaged to Alec at the time, and he was getting all these incredible like lawyer roles. So I moved to New York.
Wait. We're talking about Alec Baldwin, correct?
Yeah. And so he was getting all these amazing roles. I was. And so I moved to New York, and I just kept saying no. It's like, if I can't have a role of substance, I don't want to be in the business. If I can't respect my own craft, I don't want to be in the business. And boy, let me tell you, I was desperate at the end. I was like a Dostoevsky novel walking around the streets, like, oh my God. But I turned it over to God.
I think I was in a similar situation. I think I was starting to say no to things even though I didn't really have a right to. I don't know where that comes from. I'm fascinated by it. But I remember, maybe let's talk about our audition for a second. You know, conviction. So tell me about, so then you get the script, you read the script, and then what?
Well, the script was amazing. Every script that we had, every week, for so long, for at least the first 4 years, was like a short story. It was exciting.
And by the way, every episode, we're going to, every podcast that we do, we're going to discuss a particular episode, which we will get to on this one. So today we're going to talk about the pilot.
Today we're talking about the pilot. Next week is episode 2 with Joshua Brand, our creator, and then John Corbett is episode 3. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun.
They'll be our guests. Josh will be our guest, and right? That's what we're saying. Josh will
Corbett.
be our guest.
Then it's John Corbett, and then Barry Corbin, and we're going to have an incredible guest. And you walked into the guitar store yesterday and ran into our composer. I'm like, it's a sign
David
from God.
Right. It's amazing, and he was instantly. He said he wants to. He said he wants to come on the show. So we'll get everyone, everyone we can. I think we'll get.
I want to hover on that for just a minute. I mean, what are the odds that you and I were prepping the show and you walk into the guitar store and see David Schwartz, who you haven't seen in probably 30 years or something, right?
Wait, it's more than that. We were literally texting like 30 seconds before. And I walk in the door. I think I just hit send on my last text to you. Walk in the door of True Tone, which is my local guitar store, and and David's looking right at me.
It's so weird that I look at those as signs from God. So this is a lot of fun. But the script was amazing, and it's that terrible, horrible process of auditioning. You audition in New York, and then you audition again and again and again, and then they make the deal, and then you have to fly to Los Angeles, and then we go. I equate it to being sort of like a gladiator, the Coliseum, and all the network people are in the Coliseum, and we're on the floor. And you and I just and I walked in the room, and they ran out after my first audition with you and said, "Why did you wear a skirt? They think you look too pretty to be a pilot." I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm going to lose this role." Joshua Brand. Because they were like, she can't possibly be a pilot, I'm like, it's the inside. Everything I've been working on is about the inside. But he ran out like flailing his sides. "Why did you wear a skirt?" I'm like, oh my God. I wore a skirt, by the way, because I thought I looked fat in jeans. But I just walked back in with you, and do you remember I turned the chair and I straddled the chair like Sharon Stone?
Right. I remember that. And I remember it was a great
but I had
choice.
A long skirt.
The thing that's interesting is that that people, I'm not sure people realize this, is when you're an actor, a young actor starting out, when you audition, you usually audition once or twice, and then they make what's called a test deal. And the deal is you basically signed 6-7 years of your life away for a certain amount of income if you get the job. You're not getting the job necessarily, but
and they can fire you whenever they want, mind you.
And they can fire you whenever you want.
Yeah.
But
whenever they want.
you're in a, both of us were, I was in debt. Janine was, down to $8, and we had to make this deal for 7 years, or not even be allowed to go to the test. So obviously we both made the deal and we tested. But I read in New York for Josh and John Falsey, who was the co-creator of the show with Josh Brand,
Yeah, God bless him.
who's passed away.
Yeah,
God bless him. He's passed away. And so we won't be having him as a guest unless Janine has some special connection she hasn't shared yet.
I'll channel John Falsey. I can tell stories about John Falsey.
Well, that'll be good. So, so then I come out, I get flown out to LA, and now, again, it's like first class. They treat you like royalty once you sign on that dotted line. So they fly you first class and they put you in a hotel.
But they've got 3 other actors coming in, mind you. Usually, it doesn't mean you have it. I don't think there was another actor for you. Was there another actor?
There was one guy and about 6 girls at the test at CBS in the basement in as you said, a nondescript black box of a studio, and they're incredibly impersonal. No one talks to you. They don't say hi to you in terms of the executives or anything. And I read, and then came out and was nervous, and then the guy who was the other guy read and came out and left the building. So I was like, okay, it's just me. So then I read with all you guys and girls, and you were I think the last one, but it was such a marked difference from every other girl. Like there was just something comfortable, and as you said, you turned the chair around, and I think that was probably your second time reading. Like you probably read by yourself, and then we read together. And all I remember is that when we walked out and got in the elevator, I turned to you and said, "It's you and me." And later you told me that you thought I was hitting on you.
I don't know. Did I really say that? I don't think I thought you were. I was just so nervous.
Because you blew me off.
You were
definitely not.
Oh no. If I blew you off, it was just because I was so desperate and so nervous and had no clue if this was going to be yet another network experience where I didn't book the show. But no. There was obviously chemistry between us. So I don't think I actually blew you.
By the time I got to my hotel, the phone was blinking and my agents called and said I got it. And I just remember so clearly getting up on that bed, and I could see all the way out to the Pacific Ocean in the distance, and I just jumped up and down for I don't know, it felt like eternity, just screaming, I'm out of debt, I'm out of debt, I'm out of debt. Because the cool thing about Northern Exposure was there was no pilot. It was 8 episodes off the bat, right? They were going to put it on in the summer. They didn't believe in it. They were burning off a time slot. They had to fill a time slot, and they put this show on that no one believed in. And so we got 8 shows, which allowed me to really bank some money, right? Because
to get out of debt. Yeah. I had done that football player thing, where they visualize throwing the ball and then that someone catches it, and they visualize them athletes, they visualize winning the gold medal or whatever. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been auditioning for 12 years, and like, wow, I'm going to visualize opening a bottle of, Martinelli's with my sister-in-law at the end that I actually got the role. So it was such a delight. And then I just really think that one of the things, Rob, I think is just don't give up before the miracle. For all those people out there that are desperate and and whether they're actors or just in life, I mean, if we just don't give up before the miracle, because I was about to give up, and if I think about the fact, Woody Allen says 80% of success is showing up. What if I hadn't shown up for that last audition where I had to basically crawl to get there, because I had just been through this network experience like 3 weeks earlier. So it was a real blessing, and then I was full throttle into the role. I had like a tool belt, and I already cut my hair, so my hair was short, which appalled my mother because I'm from Texas and hair is supposed to be long, so she never got that.
That haircut became a big thing, right? I mean, it was like that was one of the things that people love. Like that was like no one else had really short hair like that on TV at the time, I don't think, right?
No, I mean, we're coming out of the Farrah Fawcett, Jacqueline Smith, era, and here I had this short hair, which when I got the part, we made it even more masculine looking and whatnot. But it's it was called the Maggie, and a lot of people. I had the
Cool.
father of my child said to me at one point years ago. He's like, I had a girlfriend once that cut all of her hair off, and I never understood why. Now I understand why. It was like the Maggie. Everybody was they were cutting their hair, but that's what was cool. Is because you can shine through your femininity can shine through in all kinds of. You don't have to be in a bikini. You don't have to have your hair all flipped back and whatnot. So it was really amazing. It was really amazing, and
It's
I
a great
loved work. And
point.
all of us were there. All of us were there. Like an acting troupe. We all had to move to Seattle, and you and I flew. I just want to tell a story. You and I flew on the same plane because my first plane. I was in first class in this first plane, and oil kept coming through the vents, and we had to keep going back. We went back to the gate and back to the gate, and I said, "I'm off. I'm off this airplane." And I got on another airplane, and you were on that airplane. So you and I literally flew. Here we were. Joshua looked at us 2 decades later and said, "Y'all were such babies," and we really were. We were like 27, but we arrived at the airport together, and which you don't remember, but I do. And we got off the plane, and there was this smell. And I remember you said to me, "Welcome to the Pacific Northwest."
You know what I remember specifically about this? I remember instantly being hit with this fragrance that I always,
Mhm.
it's like a sense memory. And whenever I go back there, it reminds me of that first time where there's something, because there's so much green there and there's so much precipitation, that the air is kind of sweet. And I remember that. And I remember
It is.
getting off the plane and thinking, wow, the air is sweet.
It is. It smelled beautiful and fragrant.
I loved Seattle as soon as I got there. There's just something kind of magical about it, and there was something. I was thinking about it. That what you're talking about, arriving and getting off the plane, and there was something. I was even vaguely conscious of a kind of magical thing going on there between all of us coming together in the service of something that felt special and had a charm to it. And as we all met, like I remember, we came to the first read through. You do,
Oh,
if
I
people
remember
don't
the
know,
first read through. I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember it. Yeah.
so people come, the cast comes together with some of the key people, the director, and you sit around a table, and there's donuts and coffee and bagels, and
Yeah, they
and
want you
you
thin,
read
but they
through
give
it.
you donuts and bagels and yeah. Then they tell you to lose weight.
And I remember going around the table and kind of clocking everybody, and as we read through it, and I just had this sense of portent. It wasn't like I was, oh my God, we're going to be a hit, because I certainly
Yeah.
had. Not only did I have no idea we'd be a hit, I didn't even contemplate the idea of it. All I knew was I was doing 8 shows. I was employed for 8 episodes. I was out of debt, and I was doing something that felt kind of cool and interesting. What do you remember from that reading? Do you remember?
I was clocking everybody at the reading too, and I remember the brightness. I remember everything about it. I remember the brightness of the room, the light coming from our left, look at where I was sitting. I remember Josh was at the head of the table. John was probably at the other side, and then Darren and Cynthia and John Corbett and you and I and Barry and John Cullum. I mean, the like most award-winning, Broadway actor, and there we all were, and I think that I felt the same way. I thought, wow. And then I remember Josh talking about, we're thinking about having a moose going through the opening credits, and the network really doesn't want us to do it, but we want a moose to go through the opening credits. And you talked about that it was a summer series, and that gave us the opportunity and our creators the opportunity to experiment, to quote from Freud and Young, and play crazy music and have a moose going through the front, and to have this woman who chops her own wood and whatnot. We could be experimental because everybody thought we were just going to be over. It didn't matter. It was
The
filler.
moose was the moose was interesting. I don't know if people know this, but you can't train a moose, and so they had to fence off the entire town to shoot that
Mhm.
opening credit sequence, because they had to make sure that the moose didn't get lost. Morty the moose, who's passed away, by the way, so he's with John
Well, it's been a
Falsey.
lot of years. It's
Um,
been a lot of years.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And we've lost Peg Phillips and we lost Diane. Did you know we lost Diane?
Yeah.
Yeah, she was so
Diane,
incredible. She was
she played, what was her character's
Maurice's
name?
girlfriend, Maurice, the
What
sheriff,
was her
the
name?
police
I
officer. I
know.
don't remember.
What
We'll
was
get
her?
to it.
Right.
And we'll get to it.
She
I
was
don't.
lovely.
But she was funny. She was so funny. So God bless all of them. But I knew something special was going to happen. And then when you watch the pilot, it's like the magic. I remember showing up even on days off because I was so excited in my little tool belt because I was this landlord, and whatnot, and my hiking boots we had to wear old 1980s high-waisted jeans and things. But I would show up and just to be there on the set because it was just the evergreen and the magic. But Rob, I got to tell you, when I watched that pilot, you were so good right out of the bat, and even in the writing and the directing, it'll be really fun to have Josh on next week because in the opening, the writing, if it's not on the page, it's not on the stage, right? So we have to start with the writing, but your delivery, even starting on the airplane, and then you get into that office. But what's so funny is the little quirky things that we did. We never sat and talked. Right, everything was always moving, and the chair of the man who's telling you about your commitment to Alaska, he's sliding back and forth in his chair. On his wheels on the chair, he slides over here and he slides back and he slides over there and he slides back, and it was those little sort of idiosyncrasies that just made the show incredibly special every moment.
John Aylward was the guy on the plane who's a great theater actor. Used to work a lot at Seattle Rep. I would go see him, and he was such a great grounding force in that scene because I remember shooting it. We went to Boeing and we shot it in a mock-up of a
Boeing's in
plane.
Seattle. Yeah.
Yeah, Boeing's in Seattle, and I guess they have these mock-ups that film companies can use, and shooting that scene was such a great. I think we might have even shot it first.
Which is rare. Just so everybody understands, usually you shoot like the last scene first.
But the thing that was interesting was there were so many kind of corollaries between me and Joel. We were both fish out of water. We were both moving to a different location to start a new life where things were not exactly what they seemed. You get there and you find out this and that. That first year, we were shooting 6 days a week and 7 days an episode. So we would shoot Monday through Saturday, and then the following Monday, and then we would move on to the next episode. And so, and in the first, I don't know, probably most of the first season, I was in almost every scene, and so I couldn't catch my breath. I remember actually thinking I'm going to die because there was no time to relax. Like I couldn't get my breath.
Right.
And Joel speaks in these huge monologues, and he has these medical jargons that I didn't know. I would literally go home at night, sit on the floor after 12, 14-hour day, sit on the floor, pull out the medical encyclopedia, and almost cry trying to figure out how am I going to make sense of this, and then come back the next day, and then I'd have one day Sunday to kind of catch my breath, and then halfway through Sunday I'd have to be working on Monday. So
we couldn't think. We couldn't think.
We couldn't think, and I remember when we came back the second season and they said, "Oh, we're going to be on a normal schedule," which was 8-day episode, 5-day weeks. It was like heaven because I could
We could have
at
a
least
Saturday
function.
and a Sunday. Yeah. And
I didn't know how I would get through it.
I think that that being on the set, what I loved about the characters, every single one of the characters, was the juxtaposition of the characters. And you said you had a lot in common with Fleischman, and I think when you go into those auditions, you're bringing so much of your own life history that people just sort of kinetically and telepathically pick up where you are in life, And here I was trying to be taken seriously, to not be to not be just this everybody look at the exterior. And Maggie O'Connell was like that, leaving from Grosse Pointe, Michigan, where she was a socialite. She decided to move out to Alaska, and she flew her own plane, and she killed her own deer, and she sawed her own wood, and she fixed her plumbing. And
do we know why she left
I don't
Michigan?
remember. I don't remember why, but it's probably very similar to what I was doing. It's like there's got to be more to life than socialites, and I certainly didn't want to be a Dallas socialite. I left Texas, you know. But
Right.
the great scene when I walk up to you and you think I'm a prostitute, right? That I'm hitting on you.
Right.
And I turn to you and say, I'm not a prostitute. I don't know, you jerk. What do I say to you? I'm not a prostitute.
You
I'm
said
your
I'm not a hooker.
landlord. I'm not a
Right.
hooker.
I'm not a
That's right.
hooker.
I'm not a
Right.
hooker, you jerk. I'm your landlord. And that was so cool because here was this juxtaposition where if you looked at me, you might think, but really I was the landlord. I was gonna carry your wood and fix your plumbing and all that. And it was this sort of and you look at when you watch the show, Darren was so amazing. I mean, Darren in that long hair and here he comes and he's this simple guy and he leaves you stranded in the truck.
It's interesting that, first of all, Darren's a blonde, right? And they dyed his hair black for the show. And it took him a second. I remember it taking him a second to find the character. I don't think he quite found him, for a couple episodes, which is not unusual.
I don't know. I thought he was pretty on spot. I thought he was on spot in
No, I
that
think if you
opening.
ask him,
He might have felt that way because I can look at my performances and think the same thing. Because we're like acting troops. We get better and better and better because we have that opportunity, unlike a movie where it's just sort of one chance. But Darren, the way and the music, and then he leaves you stranded in that truck. Ed, his character, was this simple kind of guy with his hair and his face, and like, hey, I'm going to leave the car to you. But he loved Woody Allen. He loved Woody Allen and quoted Woody Allen to you at the end. And then, as I said earlier, you have Maurice, who is this astronaut, but he's so incredibly sensitive. And you have Maggie O'Connell, who's from Grosse Pointe, but she really wants to be tough. They really created complex characters. And how do you feel like you had complex? How do you feel like Joel was complex? And then you've got Marilyn. You got Marilyn there, all by your side. I'll stitch him up. I'll help him. I'll stitch him up. How do you feel that your character had that juxtaposition?
between complexity.
Yeah, the complexity. I think all the characters had such complexity.
Yeah, for sure. They were dimensional. They were dimensional. One thing I just want to point out about that scene with Ed on the road, if you remember, he talks about his favorite TV show being St. Elsewhere.
Yeah, because they were doing the show. Yeah.
And Josh Brand and John Falsey were co-creators on St. Elsewhere and writers on it and producers on it. So I found that interesting watching the show last night that they kind of pitched their own show on the new one. They paid homage to themselves. In terms of complexity, Joel had dimensions in that. He was very fastidious about the way the world should be. He had these ideas about, in the presumption of thinking that you're a hooker in the bar. I could never imagine doing that. Even if I thought someone was a hooker, I couldn't imagine articulating that. But
Right.
he had such clear ideas. But what was interesting about Joel, for me, was that he could eventually see his own fault in something. He could see where he was narrow-minded about something, and his whole journey was a kind of opening. And it's interesting where the actor, in terms of complexity, where the actor and the character differ. I'm very different from Joel in a lot of ways. I'm similar in a lot of ways, but like I love nature. I love to be out in the woods. Nothing gives me more joy than being in the woods. And Joel, despised being in the woods. I mean, there's that great moment when he comes out after finding a rat in his that he has to carry out.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
And then he turns around and he looks where he is, and he's just
Yeah.
in this, landscape that's magnificent, but to him it's like horror.
Because
I
you're in the
think
middle
that's
of
a lot of
nowhere. And that does scare a lot of people to be in the middle of nowhere like that.
I think so, and I think a lot of the complexity of what you're talking about comes out of that juxtaposition between the actor and the character. That's where something comes that no one anticipated, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I marveled at the pilot. And, okay, maybe it was hard for us to be objective, but I marveled at the pilot because it was this amazing a kind of accumulation of things that just came together perfectly. The writing was just, it set everything up to be so funny. The actors and what you did with the role, I'm going to say it again. I thought you were just tour de force. I thought you were fabulous in the pilot. Even that moment when you walk out of Maryland's out of your office, you at the end when you find out you really have to stay there, you're going to go to prison for 18 years, and you shuffle out kind of quietly, and then you get in the car and you start banging on the steering wheel. It was just this great moment.
We shot that in like one take with a couple cameras, I think, which was unusual at the time to use more than one camera in television for sure. But when I finished and they cut, I had ripped the fingernail off my hand, off one of my fingers, and it was bleeding. And
No.
yeah, because I just went kind of berserk in there, and half the crew kind of avoided me the rest of the day because they thought I was
Well, let me ask you a
crazy.
question.
But
I wanna ask you a question about that scene. This is a behind the scenes thing that I don't even know, right? When you walked out of the office and when you found out you had to stay there and Marilyn's, comes out to get you, but you shuffle really slowly and then you get in the car and you start banging on the steering wheel. I don't remember, Rob. Was that in the script? Did Josh direct you to do that, or was that an actor's choice?
Well, it was something was in the script. I don't think it was quite to the extent that I went. And I think Josh definitely urged me toward that. I don't think I just did it on my own. He was like, he may not have said exactly what, but he was like, I just want to see you go crazy or something. And so,
Mhm.
I was young and crazy, and so I went crazy.
Oh, that was perfect. That was a great moment. It was a great moment.
It's a great moment because you see, that's the thing about acting is like when you do something like that, when one of us does something where we're physically doing the thing we're actually doing, we're not faking it. It's not like, there's not a stunt person, you're doing it. You have that experience. And I remember watching the show last night when I finished the scene and I sit on the floorboard outside of the door of the cab of the truck. The look on my face is so real, like, because I wasn't acting, like I really was exhausted, and you can tap into things as an actor. Joel had a 4-year contract. I had a 7-year contract. No, so no matter what happened, I was stuck there. But it was interesting. And also, thinking about, I was watching the scene last night. If you remember, Maurice's house was different in subsequent shows because that house, which was pretty much as you see, it came as you see it on the show, is what was how we found it when they location scouted it. And the guy was like he had like all these Hitler. He was like a Nazi, like he was really into Hitler and stuff,
Oh,
and we
no. I don't
found all
remember
this
that.
stuff. Yeah, we went into this office, and there was all this stuff, this memorabilia, and we were like, oh, interesting. And then the house was covered in weapons. I mean, every nook and cranny had weapons. Like they're just walls of guns and knives, which is just nothing wrong with guns and knives, but it was on that scale. It was really weird. And I think Josh and John got freaked out by the guy, and so they said, "Let's build it." So after that, they built Maurice's
They
house.
had their own. Yeah, I mean, and even, Marilyn was awesome. John Cullum, how he never speaks to Maurice, and you're afraid you're gonna be in the middle of some kind of altercation between the 2 of them. The intertwining of the kind of intricacies of quirkiness, I mean, that existed in this north to the future, Alaskan outback, of the
It's a
people,
tender
but
it's a tender storyline between
yeah,
the
but the
three of
people
that's
but
a,
the people really care about each other, and they have this sense of camaraderie, and even that scene in the bar where the 2 of us finally, you're drunk, not you, but Rob, Joel Fleischman's drunk, and I'm sitting there with you, and I'm telling you the story that my boyfriend died, on a glacier, because the funny thing about O'Connell's boyfriends is they all died because she was tougher than they
right.
were, right? She was just, she could go out. She knew not to fall asleep on a glacier, and he fell
Yeah.
asleep on a glacier and died. I mean, it was just those quirky, magical moments that Josh and John wrote together. They really were
Like, what
a
about
great
Ruth Ann?
team.
Ruth Ann saying to me in that scene, I come in and ask for a bagel and a schmear into the deli, and
What's a
she's like,
bagel?
"What's a bagel?"
No, I'll tell you a funny story about that. It's hard to believe, but I was raised in Fort Worth, Texas, right? Fort Worth,
Right.
Texas, small town, Fort Worth, Texas. When I moved to New York City at the age of 15, I had never seen a bagel. I had no idea what a bagel was. So we're talking
Right.
1979 or whatever. I had never seen, big sliced pizza. I didn't know what Haagen-Dazs ice cream was, but I certainly didn't know what a bagel was. And that's what's hard for all of
Right.
us to believe today with this sort of, homogeneous quality where everything is everywhere and everybody has everything. But the fact that she didn't know what a bagel was, right? That's just the
It's
small
funny, but
town
you make a good
flavor.
point. You make a good point. I guess they weren't everywhere,
Yeah.
but
Well, now they
yeah,
are.
I
Now they
love that.
are.
But it's such an idiosyncratic thing to say. It's just such an and along those lines, like Darren, in that same episode, I'm examining an actor, that the guy who played, his name is Art LaFleur, the actor who plays the one of the two couples that she keeps shooting him,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that I have to
Stabbing
take
him.
care of, and I'm examining him, and Darren just walks into the exam room and just stands there,
Mhm,
which is just so
mhm.
perfect.
Well, and
It's just
Marilyn too.
so
So Darren's character Ed, he never knocked ever. He would just arrive. He
right,
would just sort of be there.
right.
And then Marilyn would always be right there, like, "Do you want me to stitch him up?" And my favorite thing, which is coming, it wasn't in the pilot, was like, "Do you have a call on line 2?" And you always would say to her, "We only have one line," But the fact that Marilyn was able to be there, and all the characters were just so rich, and I have to say, it was amazingly cast. But what I got a kick out of, and what John and Josh were able to do, which made the show so special, is they tapped into humanity. I think we live in an environment today where everyone's like, you must behave perfectly. And if they don't, leave them, walk away, let them, all these social media things. It's like people have to behave perfectly or leave or let them, and all these therapists and whatnot.
Right. Or
But
cancel
you get there,
culture and all that.
cancel culture, but also just like, if someone like has any sort of humanity, you must leave. And in this outback of North to the Future, which I think should be one of our slogans on this 110 episode journey that you and I are on, because it
North
was
to the
like
future. I love
that was the
that.
last line of the show. But you had this couple come in where she keeps shooting him, and then at the end they're crying, and you try to be the intermediary, and they're crying, and they're saying, they're trying, you try to get them to communicate with one another. And there was this great line. She says, "If I don't kill you," and she's crying like she loves him, obviously. And she's like, "If I don't kill you, I don't know what I'm going to do."
Right.
Great line. That's a
No,
great
it cuts.
line.
They had an ability to kind of reveal humanity through unusual behavior, as you say, behavior that might be, might be not sanctioned in certain places, but that couple, you got the feeling that they were going to be okay, that they were going to find their way, even though she shot him and stabbed him in the same week,
Right.
which I'm not, is clearly not something anyone
We're
should
not
do, but
advocating that. We're not advocating
right.
any of this. Disclaimer. But it just talks about the humanity. When they got to the depth of the humanity, that they really loved each other and they could no longer communicate with each other. And that, of course, obviously, it doesn't mean you shoot or stab anybody. But I mean, it was just that the way they could tap into humanity. And your character, everybody in the end was a good person. We were all
Absolutely.
fallible. We were all fallible. We all had mistakes, but we all were good people. And the fact that Maggie O'Connell's boyfriends died, and she kept those little, later you'll see she had those little dioramas, to kind of honor all
Oh
of her
yeah.
dead boyfriends. Let me put it this way. Everybody had a vulnerability, and no matter how tough we were, because Maggie O'Connell later in the episode just socks you. She just hits you. Can I say one other thing? I don't know how you feel about this, and it's so wrong in today's culture. It's so wrong, and it was probably wrong in the culture back then. but it's funny because they were so north to the future out there in the middle of nowhere, where Barry Corbin's character would say, I've always wanted a Jew as a as a doctor. You know what I mean?
Right.
He's like, I got to get that Indian to get back over here. I mean, everything they said was
Yeah.
like completely not politically correct,
And
but
it's a
you
good
still
point.
loved everybody, and everybody was redeemed. Like Marilyn's redeemed
But
as someone who, you
it's
know.
it's a good
Go
point
ahead.
you're making because look, you're obviously, it's racism or sexism or reducing people to stereotypes is not a good thing. But the thing that's fascinating is that then the characters did redeem themselves and you did love them despite their flaws, and I think that's a good lesson, like you're pointing out. Like we in this PC, we have to be so PC correct now that you can say something and your whole life can be changed, but
Right.
it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that you're that you should be that should be the way you are thought of in terms of that one moment. And I think here's the thing about Northern Exposure that I always loved, and it was something that Josh said, was that it was a benevolent universe,
Mm-hmm.
right? That as you said, everyone, bad things happened, bad people showed up, but ultimately it was a benevolent universe where kind of goodness won out without being Pollyanna or saccharine. It was there was something refreshing about knowing that you could be flawed and still be redeemed. Yeah,
Beautifully said, Rob. Beautifully said. And isn't
yeah,
that what life is all about? I mean, I'm 62 now, and I'm realizing how flawed I am. And I just pray
yeah.
every day that I can, be redeemed and have a purpose and do something purposeful with my life that means something. And but I fail every day. You know what I mean? It's so discouraging.
I know exactly
I,
what you mean.
I, I
I'm right
said
there
I
with
set
you.
out to like I am not going to do this today. I am going to be patient, and then like within 2 seconds, I'm impatient. But we're human beings, and I think that that's what's great about this town of Northern Exposure is that they were fallible, but they were likable. They were just so lovable because
Yeah,
they all had vulnerability and an emotional complexity. And at the end, they were all trying to do the right thing and they all really cared about each other. And you could see in this pilot, like the sparks that were coming between you and me. You're talking about the redness of my lips and whatnot. And
right.
you go off and you throw
But
up
it's
and
so
you think
funny
you've
that
been in.
Joel would say something nice like that, like, and then just undercut it, right? Like he'd say how you beautiful you're. I've never seen anything, and then he equated them to what did he say? He equated them to something ridiculous. Like it's like,
Yeah.
they got in their own way in such a charming way.
We accepted each other.
But maybe that had to do with the fact that because they had no choice, they were like when you're in a town like that, you have to accept people. When you're in this circumscribed world, where your survival is you're all depending on each other for your survival. You do have to accept, and that's probably a good lesson. But Corbett didn't have a single line in the
I
pilot,
know. I noticed that.
which
I
is
noticed that.
fascinating. Because
Yeah.
he became Chris Stevens is my favorite character on the show. I'm going to just say it
Mhm.
right now. I loved I love that character. I love Corbett. First of all, I just I adored
Yeah,
him from
yeah.
the second I met him,
Mhm.
as I said to him recently, I've always loved you, and I always will. But
He's sweet. John Corbett has a sweet soul.
he has a sweet soul. I don't think
Mhm.
they thought that character was going to amount to much. And it's a real testament to John that he kind of came in and they gave him a little and he made a lot with it. And then it grew and he became one of the most beloved characters on the show.
And you know
And
why? It's because we could be true to the choices we wanted to make. He wanted to wear headbands. He wanted to have his hair long. He wanted to do, he wanted to be kind of a hippie. And sometimes they fought him on that. Like, you need to cut your hair. And he's like, no, I want my hair to be long. And so they let us, which they sort of changed later, but I mean, they let us this is what I think is a life lesson as well. Let let people bring to the table their idiosyncrasies and their insights and their visions and their talents. Let it be a collaborative experience. And I think in the
Yeah.
beginning they allow that to a certain extent. And Corbett
Tell
just
me,
brought that kind of raw innocence, and but also they learned that they could use John Corbett to say whatever philosophical thing they wanted to say. I mean,
right,
Corbett
which was
became the
so cool.
mouthpiece of like Plato and Aristotle and Jung and Freud, and they could use John Corbett's quirkiness to be a mouthpiece of this kind of higher enlightenment. And I think the show had an element of higher enlightenment.
And again, here's the interesting thing. You talk about, the complexities of characters and contradictions between the actor and the character. John is not an intellectual, or at least he wasn't. He didn't often know some of the references he was speaking to, but his soul and his heart are wise, and the combination of that with the cerebral things that they had him saying made for something special. And again, I feel like one of the unique features of the show was there was not a show at the time, that dealt with the issues and the themes, spirituality, metaphysics, philosophy, literature, art. These were regular occurring themes in our show, and that was
That
unusual
was
for
before the
television,
internet,
and
and it was before the
it was
internet.
before the internet.
I mean, we had great
Yeah,
writers that thought of these things and could bring these things in. And I don't want to leave out John Cullum's complexity of what he brought with his Broadway experience to the depth of the character. That here was this simple bartender, that lived forever, that had genes to live to be 100, but he loved his wife. And then I don't want to leave out Cynthia Geary either, because Cynthia turned out to just be a treasure, because here she was, this kind of young thing that was the antithesis of Maggie O'Connell, but she brought a depth to it, and she brought a love to it, and a comedic aspect to it
yeah.
that was also really rich. I mean, I just think every character.
She didn't have much to do in the pilot at all either. And I think, if you're an actor now and you show up on a pilot and you don't have nothing to do, you think, oh, the worst is going to come. But again, her character grew to be so beloved. And as you say, she brought so much charm, and she was beautiful, and she
She was
had a
funny.
quirkiness to her,
She was
and she was
funny. Yeah.
funny. And Cullum was like, I knew him from Broadway shows, having seen him, and he had such a kind of, it was, as soon as I started working with John, and the first scene I did with him, it was so easygoing, and I don't think I ever had a conflict with him, really, never about a
He was a
scene, we
nice
never,
person. He's
and
a
it was
nice
so easy to
person.
work with. He just went
Yeah.
with the flow.
I think I can say that you and I did not go with the flow. You and I,
Yeah,
you and I.
yeah,
There's this book. I don't know what it's called, but you can like see what kind of character you are. And I think you and I are
right,
both challengers. You and I are both challengers.
right,
And
yeah,
and we really challenged each other. We challenged everybody around us, and we really, really cared about our work. And that doesn't mean that John
right.
Cullum didn't care about his work, but he was just such a charmer, and he was so relaxed in who he was. And
But
you and I
also,
were there
these
trying to
guys,
find out who we were.
well, these guys were older. They were more
I feel like if
they
we
were
did
more
it today.
comfortable.
Yeah. Let
We
me
were
tell you
young
about
and
the
like trying
olden
to make our
days.
name for ourselves. No, we were, but we were making our names for ourselves. They already had their name. But the other one,
Mhm.
I didn't know if we spoke enough about Elaine Marilyn. One of the great acting lessons of my life came from Elaine Miles, who has a fascinating story. When we get her on I'm going to save it so when she comes on the show. But like, but she wasn't really an actor, and
She
yet
never
she has a
acted a day
clear
in her
natural
life, I
talent.
don't think.
Yeah,
Don't you wanna tell a little bit
and
of the story?
no,
You should
no,
tell the
no,
story.
no. Let's leave it. Let's
Okay.
leave it. Let's
Well,
leave
we
it.
got a
Let's leave
story
it for her to
coming
tell.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, how she got the job is a great story. But what I she was so simple that if I overacted in a scene, it was so obvious because here was someone who was just real. So I had to kind of come to her level so that it didn't seem like we were in two different worlds. And I learned a lot, I watched those scenes from the get-go. I started watching dailies and I started watching what was working and what wasn't. And I learned so much about film
Yeah.
acting and a lot from Elaine.
Right, and I
So I
learned
think we've
from you,
covered
by the
everyone in
way.
the
I'll
cast.
just let everybody know that Rob asked for dailies, and so I'm like very competitive and very very challenging, and I'm like, well, if Rob gets dailies, I get dailies, and so I started watching the dailies, and the dailies, as everybody knows, it was a compilation of the film that was put on VHS, and then we would put it in our it would be the take one, take two, take three, take four of that day's work. And that's why they call them the dailies. And some directors were brave enough on movie sets, like on Cliffhanger, to let you actually arrive and go to the daily screening. They don't do that anymore, but it was really, really fun to do. But I'll say what when I think about Maryland too, because I was thinking about that as we were watching the pilot last night, the editing was great. I mean,
Editing was great.
the editing, I mean, and when I talk about, I've done a lot of work lately in the CEO world, running a foundation and whatnot, and they don't get me, right? They just don't understand my level of passion, but they don't understand my level of collaboration and they don't understand what it's like to collaborate. But we have to
Right.
collaborate. And as actors, we give what we give, and then we have to let go of it because the editors go in there, and then you add on the music. We should end, talking about the music. But the editors were great because they would cut to Marilyn for the absolute perfect little moment where she lifted
Yeah.
her eyebrow or did something very
Right.
simplistic that fed the scene, like when the couple is talking about not shooting or stabbing each other anymore, and they would cut to you, but they would cut to her. And so let's talk about editing for a minute, because I think the editing was pretty phenomenal.
The editing was great. They had, and the interesting to point out though, we shot the show in Seattle, which doubled well for Alaska. And ironically enough, which I think Josh can speak to on our next episode, the writers had never been to Alaska when they wrote the show, but somehow they captured it. They captured this kind of bonhomie and the landscape somehow. They captured it, how it informs character. But we shot that in Seattle, so the actors and production was in Seattle, but the post production and producers and the writers were all in Los Angeles. So we
Hmm.
were which to me I liked. A lot of people didn't like it, but I liked it because it gave us a little more flexibility in terms of what we were doing on the set without
until
interference. Eventually,
until looping.
right? Well, we can do a whole episode on looping, but
Right, we'll
but
talk
the
about that in another
editors
episode.
the editors were in LA and they had three different groups of them. That would work on each episode as it came down the pike, and they were great. And Josh and John were very hands on in terms of they every script went through their hand. No matter who wrote it or who got the credit, they did a pass on it before it went to the floor, so to speak. And they were in the editing room, very focused on every detail of the cut. And then, as you say, then we get to the music, which was one of the huge staples of the show. I mean, the guy named Martin Brucely, who went on to do the music for The Sopranos and was a bit of a genius, and one might say a large part of the success of the show could be attributed to Martin's ideas for music. I mean, if you
Mhm.
go through the episodes, it's just there's just endlessly cool music aside from the score that David Schwartz did, the Calypso theme song that
Mhm. I just want to interject right there to give an example. Darren's in the car and he's driving you, and he's talking about what cassette tape to put in the car or whatever, VHS, whatever it was. And then it comes on
right.
Louie, doo doo, doo
Yeah.
doo, doo doo, Louie. And like the music really was awesome, and Martin was incredible with the music. And then if you listen in the bar, there were always all these little idiosyncrasies of what music was playing on in the background in Holling's bar.
And as you say, like Louie was like, it's nothing's on the nose. It's just kind of, wait, Louie in Alaska? What? It just all of it. Or Etta James coming up over a landscape. It just he was so brilliant in they're called needle drop. The songs that go on that they put on underneath the show. But music was a huge feature. They put out CDs and albums of the soundtracks.
I mean, we had CDs, we had T-shirts, we had cookbooks. But in closing here, Rob, I think it's also an element that was a star of the show was the scenery, and it was so fun to watch the pilot last night. As I said, as we started, Rob and I were calling one another and texting one another after we watched the pilot because it was just so much fun. And I encourage you, if you haven't for some reason watched the show, please watch the show because I promise it's just a feel-good show. But the mountain, the mountain over that lake where we filmed, there were segments of it that they used throughout the episode, but then also at the end of the episode, we had the picnic in front of that mountain. We drove by that mountain once every 8 days because we filmed in Seattle at Redmond, Washington on a soundstage, which was an old industrial building, by the way. But then we drove every week and a half to Roslyn, Washington. And Roslyn, Washington was this old coal mining town, which we can talk about next week, like the brick. It was an old coal mining town, and the mountains and the snow and the smell of the air and the fireplaces. But we drove by that mountain. I think people might like to know that we drove by that mountain every day on the way to Roslyn, Washington.
The landscape was a character, and that I think that might be the first time on television at that point that landscape was a character. It was integral to everything that was going on, was where these people were in that environment and how that informed them. So I think we've covered it. One thing that I look forward to getting to is we didn't talk a lot about the costumes,
Right.
and the set design, which was so amazing.
Yeah.
We'll get to that in subsequent. Maybe we'll get Mimi
And how they
on,
wouldn't. Everybody wanted to come be a guest star. All the pop, big, huge movie stars, and everybody wanted to come be a guest on our show, and they wouldn't allow them because they wanted to keep the integrity of the small town. But yeah, the costumes, and we've lost her too. By the way, we lost Catherine
Bentley, but Mimi Melgard, who was her second in command and my girlfriend for a while. She did a great job, and then went on to Grey's Anatomy for 15 years. But I think, look, this was really fun. I look forward to the next episodes. I look forward to getting some fan feedback. Really what I look forward to is talking to our friends that I don't see that much, and hearing what they think.
We have Joshua Brand, our creator, our father figure, the God, is next week. And then the next week after that, we have John Corbett. And which will be a lot of fun. It has to be fun if John Corbett's on the show. And then we have Barry Corbin, who's gone on also. He had a career before and a career after. He's been in all kinds of Academy Award winning movies. And after that, we'll get Cynthia and Daring, and then we'll get David Swartz and music. It's just going to be a great experience to kind of relive this. And I've heard a lot of people who've never seen the show before that have now reached out to me and binged the whole thing, or younger generations. I'm so happy, and thank you Amazon Prime Video for picking up the show, and to Universal Studios and all the work that you and I both have independently done to bring this show to Prime Video and to get it out there. And it's all over Europe. It's all over the world. It's in Israel. It's in South Africa.
Yeah, it's streaming. It's streaming now on Amazon Prime. If you don't know that, you can watch it on Amazon Prime, as Janine said.
Yeah, and Rob. Okay, for all of you out there, I will always have a special place for Rob Morrow in my life. I mean, you can't work. You can't work with someone 18 hours a day, for 5 years, and you kind of have a love for that person. And I will always treasure you and love you. And I think in closing here, I treasure the sort of collaborative challenging we gave to one another. You and I competed, but like Maggie O'Connell did with Fleischman, but it lifted us to higher levels, and you really cared about your work, and I really cared about my work, and not all actors do. Not all actors do. You and I know have worked with people that kind of shuffle through and do the thing, but you always had such a passion, and I'll always have a special place in my heart for you, Rob Morrow, and I'm thrilled that we have the chance to do this together.
Well, the feeling's mutual. It's been fun catching up with you. So onward and north to the future.
North to the future. Okay, so we look forward to next week's episode and we want to close tonight, and brought to you by O'Connell and Fleischman.
I think maybe it would be better if we say Fleischman and O'Connell.
Yeah, sure. Well, in your dreams, Fleischman.
Northern Disclosure is a production with Evergreen Podcasts and executive produced by Paul Anderson and Scott McCarthy for Workhouse Media.